So as Tony mentioned, what I'll be going through today is my research on the historic urban canopy cover of Great Britain, looking at 10 case studies from all across Great Britain. So I'm an urban forest research scientist with Forest Research, and one of my main research focuses is canopy cover and the quantification of canopy cover. So I know we've been talking a lot about it this morning, but I think it's always worth starting the beginning with a definition. So what we are looking at in this presentation today as canopy cover is the layer of leaves, branches, and stems of trees that cover the ground when viewed from above. So I'm talking about a bird's eye view of canopy cover rather than the volume that has been discussed in some of the presentations today. So, just a little overview of what I'll be going through today. I'm going to be looking at historic urban canopy cover assessments, particularly what they are and why they're so important. To do this, I'll explore a few previous studies from across the world and within Great Britain. We'll go through my approach towards historic urban canopy cover assessment, and then delve a little bit deeper into the 10 case studies that I have specifically looked at. Then we'll go with, what are we going to do next? What are we going to do with this information? And some concluding remarks. So, anecdotally, and in some of the presentations that have been this morning, we have seen decreasing urban canopy cover, both globally and within Great Britain. My research really aimed to test this theory using 10 case studies. Okay, so what are they? What are historic urban canopy cover assessments? It's a bit of a mouthful, but historic urban canopy cover assessments make use of historic information, in this case aerial imagery, to examine changes in canopy cover in urban areas over time. And this has a number of fantastic uses. So canopy cover is often recognised as becoming a baseline for urban forest managers to use in order to begin to improve and maintain the urban forest canopy, and therefore urban forests on the whole. They provide a long-term view to the urban forest, which is particularly important. We all know trees don't grow in a day. It's worth looking at them as a long-term view. So, the most logical place to start, previous research. What research has already taken place concerning historic canopy cover assessments? It's worth mentioning first off that this is by no means an exhaustive list. These are just some studies I picked out which I found particularly interesting. They had very comparable data to that which I had available, or they took place in Great Britain. So first of all, you'll notice here that only 3 of these studies took place in Great Britain. They are primarily from the United States. There's also some other sort of what I perceived as gaps in the literature, which is that often these canopy cover assessments only analysed a very short period of time, often 5 years or around that amount of time. So I did pick out some here which were much longer periods of time. An example of this was Sheffield. The Sheffield canopy cover assessment was particularly interesting. It covered 110 years of Sheffield's history, from 1900s to 2010s. This also used particularly interesting data. Clearly, in the 1900s, there weren't aerial photography taking place. They actually used ground-based photography and paired it from the 1900s to the 1950s to the 2010s. Which led to a massively long-term view of the urban forest in Sheffield. Sheffield actually saw decline from the 1900s to the 1950s, and then increase in canopy cover by 100% from the 1950s to the 2010s. Now, this is actually a very different story to the 2 other canopy cover assessments which have taken place in the UK. The one at the top, the low resolution historic canopy cover assessment of Great Britain, actually showed no statistically significant change from 2011 to 2016 across Great Britain. However, this was attributed to the low sample density across Great Britain. The results of this have been in the ArgMag, which some of you might have seen. However, Wales Towns and Cities, which was a much more extensive study of all urban areas in Wales, showed that there actually has been a decrease from 2009 to 2013 in 72% of all areas in terms of canopy cover. Between 2006 and 2009, Wales showed an increase, but this goes back to some of the issues that have been discussed today concerning image resolution and the different numbers that can come out of this. It showed an increase, but this was put down to a better resolution of the data in 2009, which then showed a decrease coming on to 2013. So, after looking at some of the previous research and looking at the data that we had available, we chose 10 towns and cities in order to analyse the historic canopy cover change in Great Britain. This map shows the 1940s data which is available in black and white. So the 1940s data consists of some 1940 data, which is available just for Kent here, and then the rest of this data, all across the rest of Great Britain, is 1945 data. So primarily based on data availability, but also looking at a number of other factors, we chose these towns and cities. Some of the other factors were whether there has already been a present-day canopy cover assessment, as that would be very useful for us. And also trying to get a spread across Great Britain. We didn't want to lump all the cities together and get a very biased view of the changes that are going on. So in terms of the current canopy cover assessments that have taken place, this fed in quite strongly to the number of points that we chose to use for each city. The number of points has been discussed today in terms of iTree canopy work and the dot-based method, which is what we used here. So the number of points is based on the availability of data and the previous work that has been done. So for example, Edinburgh had a high number of points because some of Edinburgh wasn't covered in the 1945 data, so we had to mitigate with that with a higher number of points. And this slide here shows some of the importance of the points. This is Edinburgh here, and this is 2016 data behind it. So you can see here we have a random grid, or a random point layer overlaying the aerial imagery, which has all been gone through before, so I won't go through it too carefully now. But you effectively zoom in on each of these points and classify them as tree or not tree for this analysis, which, sorry? Which then you can turn into a percentage canopy cover estimation. But we're working with historic data. This has a couple of issues. So this is the data available for Maidstone. Maidstone actually had fantastic data availability. It had historic data from 1940, 1960, 1990, and then from all of the 2000s, which made it a joy to analyse, except when you zoom in on the 1940 data. As you can see here, so the town boundary is outlined in red, which is what we placed our points into. And then you can see here we have some missing data. In the case of Maidstone, this wasn't in the town boundary, but this was the case in some other cities. In this case, we discarded the points completely. We didn't analyse them for any of the years, otherwise it would change our results quite drastically. But that wasn't our only issue. You can also see here we had some areas of distortion where the image has been taken at a slight angle and then changed by Google Earth to fit into the flat area that it gives you. We also have some areas of cloud in about the same area, and you can see where all the photographs join together. which can be a little bit tricky if they're slightly off-center and your point is right in the middle of it. So that shows you some of the issues we had with the historic data, but we did come up with ways to overcome this. This is some of the other aerial imagery that we used. This is from britainfromabove.org, which is a fantastic resource if you're interested in historic aerial imagery. And Britain from Above has hundreds of thousands of photos across Great Britain, which show the landscape from above. But this is all taken pretty much from a oblique angle, rather than a bird's eye view as we were using from Google Earth. So for a little bit of comparison here, I've got the Google Earth imagery over here, which I've actually tilted, so it looks like it's taken from an oblique angle. And I've twisted it so that north is facing that way, which matches it up quite carefully with the Britain from Above area. As you can see, this little point is what I was trying to classify. It's not particularly clear under there whether that's a tree. There's a slightly darker patch, which could be construed to be a tree, but I don't want to do it on just could be. But in the Britain from Above imagery, it's pretty clear that there is no tree there. So this really helped us when doing our analysis of the earlier data. I particularly wanted to include this slide. This is a storyboard of just a particular point in Birmingham. This is actually sort of just to the edge of a power station in Birmingham. And it gives you a great example of how it can change over time, and even a fairly short period of time from 1999 to 2018. Rather than the full 78 years that we were studying in total. So you can see in 1999, we've got some bare soil or potentially freshly planted, pretty tricky to tell, which moves on to some scrubby area and a little bit more scrubby. And then by 2007, we have a little fully fledged patch of trees, which continues on through the years. And I just think this gives a really nice example of how some of the changes were shown over time. You can also see another issue that we had with winter imagery. If this image was a standalone one, you might not class this as trees. It's fairly difficult to tell if they're trees or bushes or shrubs. But with the combination of these images, you can usually tell, which made us confident on our data. So now we've been through the methodology of how we conducted this research. I'd like to go into some of the results that we've come up with. I know there's quite a lot to take in here, but I've split it up into regions for a little bit of easier reading. So we've got South East England up here, which includes Maidstone, Milton Keynes, and Oxford. We've got Wales and West England over here, which is Cardiff, Swansea, Birmingham, and Chester. We've got Scotland and North England over here, which is Edinburgh, Newcastle, and Darlington. Okay, so I don't know about you, but to me, this all looks like a pretty happy picture. We've got quite a lot of upward trends over here. So out of the 10 cities that we studied, 7 of the cities did actually show increasing canopy cover, 4 of which were statistically significant. This included, go to my little stats book. This included Milton Keynes, Newcastle, Darlington, and Chester. And that's fantastic. We have some statistically significant increase in canopy cover. Amazing. Milton Keynes is a particularly great example. We have an increase from 16.2% to 29.4%, which is amazing. It puts it to about 12th in the UK in terms of canopy cover rankings. So fantastic. We did also see some not statistically significant changes, which included Oxford, Swansea, and Edinburgh. But you still have an increase, you know. We saw a couple of little to no change, Cardiff and Birmingham. And we did see one urban area, which is Maidstone up here, which shows statistically significant decline. However, we are re-examining our Maidstone data as we've had some slightly spurious results from it. As you can see at the end here, we had a particularly low R value. So we're re-examining that, and the results of that will be out soon. So this gives the overall view of the 78 years that we analysed for all of the cities. But I do think it's worth zooming in a little bit to the last 20 years. So we've got the same regions here for easy reading, and this does show a bit of a different story. So we don't have quite as many urban areas showing increase, no urban areas showing significant increase. We have 3 showing little to no change, and 2 urban areas showing decline, which you can see up here, Birmingham declining fairly strongly, and where's the other one? Someone here. Well, Darlington's sort of on the way down. Yeah, so this is a little bit of a different story, and I think it is worth zooming in and creating these trend lines for these areas. But there is still some fantastic news here. For example, Milton Keynes, a planned city, is still going up very consistently. And this gives us confidence in our data. The values tend to be nicely, as we would expect, along the line, as aligned with growth and things for the Urban Canopy. So now we have this information. What are we going to do with it? So historic canopy cover assessments are quite time-consuming. As I showed in a previous slide, the data for this sort of long-term assessment isn't present for all areas of the UK. So it's not possible to quite do that. But we did see in a number of the presentations this morning that there have been shorter-term historic canopy assessments taking place all over the world. And these are really interesting, and they can show us trends in our urban forest. But they say that, you know, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the second best time is now. How about we start our historic urban canopy assessment today with today's urban canopy assessment, which will turn into a historic assessment in the future. So Forest Research have created a canopy cover web map, which has been previously mentioned. And this is aiming to map the urban canopy cover by percentage, by ward, for all urban areas in the UK. This is a citizen science project, and we've had a fantastic response. It's been up and running since January, and we've already completed 16% of the urban areas of the UK. Which doesn't sound like a lot as such, but that is 700 volunteer hours put into this map in particular. We've had some incredible areas such as Cambridgeshire, which the whole of Cambridgeshire has now been mapped. Manchester was mapped as part of the City of Trees programme, and Birmingham has been fully mapped. This is a little zoom in to give you an idea of the task that we're undertaking here, or that citizen scientists are undertaking. On this map, London, of course, you can see we have the green wards, which have been completed. So the lighter green is less canopy cover. So you can see down here the key coming from like 0%, 0 to 5, 5 to 10. And the very dark green wards are the very high canopy cover, above 30%. The yellow wards are those which have been assigned to citizen scientists. They assign themselves, we don't just hand them out. And they will be completing those in the near future. So all the information comes into us and we upload it onto the map for everyone to see. And some people get very, very into this and send a lot, and it's fantastic. And yeah, so if anyone would like to give this a go, which I encourage you strongly all to, you can follow this web link here, or I have flyers at the end if you're interested, as it's a fantastic project to get involved with. Okay, so just to wrap up a little bit, what I've gone through, the historic canopy cover assessment of the UK, we really like to see it as a baseline for improving canopy cover assessments across Great Britain and further afield. historic canopy cover gives the long-term view of the urban forest that is so important, the long-term dynamics and beginning to delve deeper into the drivers of change. The results that we've come up with from this research do show a pretty happy picture of 4 urban areas having statistically significant increase, over from the 1940s to 2018, and only 1 area of statistically significant decline. From 1999 to 2018, we do have 5 areas of increase in canopy cover and 2 areas of decline. But really, the next step of all of this is expanding this research and beginning to map canopy cover, both historic and present, for across Great Britain more fully. Thank you. I think I've underrun a little bit, but more time for questions.